what has been a very cold Bozeman, Montana, where we are actually thrilled that the high is over 30 degrees today. Michelle, how are you and where are you joining us from?
Yeah, it's cold. It's not over 30, but maybe tomorrow. So, yeah, I'm joining from Chicago. So, we just had a couple of really cold days too, where it's like 0 or less. So, yeah.
I know it's pathetic when you're like happy that it's over zero. It feels balmy.
It makes a difference though, every 10
It really
degrees.
does. Perfect. Pat, how about you? Where are you at? And what's your weather
Okay,
like?
I'm in sunny Oakland, California, but the other day I got up and it was 37 degrees. And for us, that is cold because
I
we
bet.
don't have very good insulation. And so I had to come out and turn on all the heaters. It's nice, but our typical winter weather, which will be over in about a week.
Yeah,
Winter
I,
lasts about 6 weeks out here. But we do
I
have,
bet.
fairly chilly weather and frost advisories, but definitely not below zero, thank God.
Yeah, I bet. Well,
Mhm.
I'm sure 37 is like serious puffy coat weather for you folks.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We don't have our 60 insulation.
Oh my goodness. Perfect. All
Right.
right. Well, it is just past the hour, so I'm officially going to kick us off. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Arno, and I am the lead event specialist on the XYPN marketing team. Today, I am thrilled to host this webinar, Future Proof Your Firm How to Succeed at Succession Planning, with two of our XYPN members, Michelle Smallenberger and Pat Jennerjohn. I do want to point out just a few housekeeping items. On the right, the top tab that you see is the chat function. And below that, and that's where we're going to be dropping resources. Below that is the Q&A module. So if you do have any questions for us to address throughout the session, please submit them there. We do have some questions that were submitted beforehand, so we will be answering a mix of both pre-submitted and live questions throughout our conversation. At the end, to exit the webinar, please click back to the lobby on the top left of your screen, and you will see a feedback survey pop up there when you leave the webinar. We would love for you to take a moment to complete that, and please also submit any ideas that you have for topics that you would like to see in the future. Also, be sure to register for next month's free webinar, Automate, Optimize, Maximize, How to Increase Productivity in Your Firm, with XYPN members Raquel Hinman and Michael Reynolds. That event will be held on March 8th, and you can find the link to register in the chat. Last thing for now, it's never too early to start thinking about attending XYPN Live. So obviously I'm biased, but I think it is the best conference in the industry, and I hope that you will join us in Atlanta, September 19th through the 21st. Okay, well, thank you to our guests for their patience as they got through that. I would love to now have our panelists introduce themselves. Pat, can you please introduce yourself and your firm and tell us a little bit about your experience with succession planning?
Hi, so I'm Pat Jennerjohn, and I'm a fee-only advisor, a solo practitioner with a part-time assistant, and I'm in Oakland, California. I've been in practice on my own since 1999. So I am not wanting to say I'm near the end of my career, but I'm at the point in my career where I do seriously need to think about a transition. So I am in the beginning stages of planning a fairly extended sell and stay strategy. I work with a business coach, and this is, I think, a great way to bring a younger advisor in, not put a huge financial strain on them as they buy into the business. I get to stay around and either mentor or bug them, whichever they think I'm doing. And it has some choice about when I go, avoiding a hard stop for both me and, more importantly, for my clients. And so I'm working with a business coach towards this end. And so she and I have been working on ways to make my practice a practice someone's going to want to join and eventually take over.
Great. That's so helpful. Michelle, how about for you?
Yeah, so I started in financial planning right out of graduating from college at Kansas State University from the financial planning program. And I worked at a firm, an RIA, for 12 years and was hoping that I would be the succession plan for that. And that advisor didn't necessarily want, Pat, what you were wanting. And so just over time, we just kind of said, you know what? We need to start our own firm. So we launched Financial Design Studio, and then a couple years after that, we merged a couple of XYPN firms into our firm, and so that kind of became, a form of our succession plan for now. So that's the experience that I have.
Perfect. That's so helpful. Thank you. Okay, so let's get into some of our pre-submitted questions. So I'm 14 years out from retiring. I plan to sell and stay for the last year. What are 3 key things I should focus on to maximize the sale value? Pat, sounds right up your alley. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I can at least address a couple of those. For one thing, have really good client demographics. You don't want to practice where everybody's over the age of 65. And so I've been working really hard to get a nice, smooth pipeline of various client ages, stages in life, and planning needs, from just starting out, and there'll be lots of plans to do with them going forward. So you need to have really good client demographics in place, and you need to have processes in place. One of the ways I've avoided ever having to have a full-time employee is that my tech stack is really fabulous. And having come into XY, I had already much of that material, so I felt like I'd made good decisions. But you have to have something that's efficient, works well, sort of a my financial planning firm for dummies kind of approach. Understand you wear all of these different hats and actually have an org chart that shows you how the work is done, and who it's done best by. Because that's one of the appeals of franchises is you walk in and it's turn the key and you go. And I'm not saying make your business into a franchise, but do adopt some of that thinking so that someone doesn't have to come in and reinvent everything.
Yes, kind of like a plug and play feel.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Michelle, what do you think?
I would just add to that also, those are exactly what one of the things I would say. One thing I would add is just getting really clear on what you want. So if you're 14 years out from retiring, what does that look like? Because your timeline and the timeline of who the successor is going to be, or if it's more of a merger or an acquisition, those are things that need time to happen. So that's really the biggest thing is what you want to happen, what you want your transition out or your retirement to look like, because that will affect so much. And one thing I just always think of is, people might say, I've got several years. And even if your business isn't for sale today, it needs to be saleable. So even if, we never know what's going to happen. And so you always want to be optimizing all these things that Pat's talking about. Those things matter at any given time. So I think especially focusing on those things now and what you want is really going to give you great direction for where you go over the years.
That makes sense. And probably also like 3 different plans, maybe, right? Like best case scenario, you will have 14 years, but what happens if it's 7? What happens if it's 1,
Yeah.
right? Maybe some things that you can like pivot if you absolutely have to.
Yep, exactly.
What, in your opinion, is the best succession plan for a successful, established single advisor planning firm? I'm late to the party and find the choices overwhelming. I don't have a training program for a younger advisor. This is a small, efficient shop. So they work with a variety of clients. Many people tell me to dump the less wealthy clients that are outside my personal value system for a variety of reasons. So basically, like, what are the options for someone that's a solo advisor? What do you think is the right one? And then if someone's coming in that doesn't want the same niche, like, what do you do with those folks that you have? Michelle, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah. So I think, well, the biggest question, is if you have segments of your clients where they don't necessarily meet your ideal client profile today, we might have an ideal client or a niche, but we can always choose to take on anyone, even if they don't meet that. And so this is where, sometimes we get maybe more joy, or we love helping people that maybe can't afford our services at the full price, whatever that is, whatever the reason. Especially if they don't align with your values. Those are things where you might want to say, what do I do with this? Now, this kind of ties in with if you're going to sell your business, when you start to do ratios of the revenue per client or revenue per household, and maybe these aren't meeting minimums and things like that, these can affect some of those values. Maybe sale price and things like that. So those are some things you'll want to think about depending on where you're at in the stage. Some of the options that I just think of, the ideal, I love that Pat has this thought of, I want to retire out. I just love taking care of our clients. And so that means kind of phasing out, but making sure that someone else is taking care of them like you took care of them. And so I love that thought of it. But some people just say, I just want to be done. And so it really depends on what you're looking for. Some options with the client segment that you may not want to keep, you could say, maybe chunk off what that segment is and say, do I sell these clients to another advisor who is more of maybe like an hourly planner, or some of these XY advisors who are getting started? I know a lot of them are interested in new clients, so that may be a way that you could get rid of them, you could sell them, or just hand them off. You could keep them and maybe just set a minimum and increase their minimum so that they are a little bit more, maybe profitable, or, maybe then they are worth keeping. But best succession plan really comes down to you and what you want. I personally love the thought of kind of transitioning out slowly, so that I know everyone's cared for. So.
So it kind of sounds like start with whatever your goal is, whether it's like just to be
Mhm.
done, whether it's to take care of your clients, like kind of figure out like your why at the end of this and then work
Mhm.
backwards maybe.
Yeah.
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 Pat, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I mean, I would definitely go along with segmenting it. When I read the question, it sounded like the practice was a little bit all over the map. And maybe you need to add some focus by segmenting these clients and then saying, okay, here's how these folks will be served. Here's how these folks will be served. Um, and have sort of silos, for that type of business. And then if one silo does not seem to be working well, then that might be a consideration. Yeah, you just have to have it organized, and everyone needs to get the same quality of service, but they don't always need to get the same level of service. So there might be once a year folks, yeah. So I would say get your client base organized so you know what you're working with, and you're not looking at your client list and then feeling really confused. Because
Mhm.
I have been in business long enough, I not so much anymore, but I have a lot of grandfathered in clients. So I have like four different layers of fee structures based
Mhm.
on how they started out. And that could look pretty messy. And I think, a good hard look at sort of unifying and systematizing and making that consistent will be helpful. And, some clients, if you raise their fees, it's going to price them out. Um,
Mhm.
I did have an experience with an advisor who was trying to do that, and she showed me the clients that she wanted to sort of lay off, and they weren't clients I would take. So you need to be sure that any advisor who's going to help you out in this way, that those are clients that actually are fitting for them, and you're not just driving the car
Mhm.
out to the desert and throwing the kittens out, because that's how they'll feel. So
Yeah.
you've got so there's a certain amount of tact also involved in working with legacy clients and clients that are no longer a fit for you. I mean, my niche is people I like working with, but they still also have to be, reasonably lucrative for me. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean I can't set up different levels of service for them, but if you're really attached to your client, that's also a really hard thing to do, to say, okay, who am I going to let go? It's easy to get let go of clients that are a pain in the butt, but if we've worked our business attraction model well enough, we don't have clients we don't like. So how do you
Mhm.
serve them well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, while we're on this, so I'm curious then. So, how are you finding folks to refer? So, if you have a client that comes to you and is not the right fit, or as you're moving towards the end of your career and you want to like kind of organize this, like how are you finding folks to refer them to that are going to be a good fit? This kind of ties into a question that we asked, as someone asked, of any suggestions for how a next gen advisor can network and meet advisors who are looking to set up a succession plan. So, I guess for both of you, now that you're in the positions that you are, how do you find folks that you send people to? And then when you were starting out, how did you connect with other, not necessarily older, but maybe more tenured advisors that could refer people to you?
Mhm.
Pat, you want to kick us off there?
Well, as a person who's now one of those older experienced planners, when I first started out, I was a career switcher, so I was in my mid 40s. And I was so grateful for the help of my more experienced colleagues, and a lot of them did refer out. But you have to make yourself known to these people, so generally, I very rarely, because my marketing is pretty on target, and plus I'm not trying to grow rapidly, I'm going through organic growth. I rarely attract someone who's not going to be a good fit. But if they aren't, I definitely refer them out to NAPFA and to XYPN. Um, because a lot of times when someone comes to you, they've been drawn to you for some sort of reason. And then when you refer them out, you kind of lose momentum. There's a little bit of friction. That's not the person they were originally attracted to. So it's a little difficult. And I've had the same experience the other way around, where an advisor's referred someone to me because it wasn't a good fit for them. But after I've worked with them for a while, I realized they're not a good fit for anybody, unfortunately. So you've got to be careful that you're not just passing the hot potato.
I want to dive into that just a little bit, Pat, of like, what does that look like in practice? You say you refer out to Nat for XY, but like, what does that really mean? Do you have some advisors that you know that you email directly? Do you post it in like our member forums? Like, what does that really look
I
like?
give the prospective client the direct links to go into the find an advisor.
Okay,
And
got
I
it.
do a little probing as to how they found me because I'll tell you, some people who weren't a good fit just sort of did a Google search or looked in the online. And because I was geographically close to them, and these days I have clients all over the country who
Yep.
moved, and whatever. I worked with a client in Hawaii who I never ever met,
Wow.
and it was all remote. So it's who you attract, and so I think sometimes people don't realize that geographic proximity isn't always necessarily the most important thing. But you still go into Google and say, "the only advisors near me." And so
Yeah.
you'll come up on a search, and just because I'm in the same zip code doesn't mean I'm the right planner, you know.
Yeah.
So I
Absolutely.
refer out and I tell people, a lot of these people work remote, don't be constrained by geography. Look at what they have to say, look at their website and get a feel for them. My website's very carefully designed so that people will understand what it's like to work with me when they look at the website. But sometimes they don't get that far. They just say, same zip code. I'm going there.
Yeah, Michelle, what do you think? So, how do you find advisors to refer to? And then when you were starting up, how did you network with more tenured advisors?
Yeah, so I do think some of those basic search engines are really helpful. I know sometimes I'll have clients who are maybe looking, just prospective clients who are looking for a different fee structure or different type of service. Maybe they're looking for ESG investing specifically, whatever that is. And I do like how the XY in that search, you can actually specify by certain things like that. So I think that's really helpful for them to find people that are a good fit right away. So that NAPA, and then the other way is through like XYPN. When you start as a member, you're usually put in a group. So those kind of groups, kind of mentoring groups that you keep with, if you are keeping up with those in our firm, since there's a few of us that are XY members, we're each in different circles because they usually try to put you with different people not in the same area. And so those have been even recently, someone in one of my partners groups, he was saying, well, I would take on clients, that maybe we don't want. And so even that just gives you a list of names. I also know that there's, I think, some advisors who have lists on their website. When they're full, they actually list other advisors that you can reach out to who have the same maybe belief and service model, things like that. So there's a pretty wide variety, but usually I try to kind of direct them to something that's actually going to be helpful so that they can actually like really target in on what they're looking for, since I know they're not a good fit, but I know where they can go find that. And at least we're pointing them to good places where it's fee only, or advice that they're going to get. So
Great.
And
Thank
I
you.
wanted to add to you that a lot of people are specifically looking for advisors who do not require AUM before they'll talk to them.
Mm,
That's a huge thing that is in favor of XY and the way the service models that are encouraged there. So that's a super untapped market. And and I enjoy doing planning. So, and I don't require AUM. I mean, it's lovely to get it, but
absolutely.
everybody's chasing that worm. There's lots of other worms over here that.
Mm-hmm.
one thing I was kind of thinking as we were talking about like segmenting your clients, I know when we started, we both, my husband and I, we started our firm, and we left. So like starting our firm, like it needed to work. We needed our business to be growing. And so
Mm.
we, didn't have an ideal client or niche that we said only these people, but we instead were kind of like, it's kind of that typical order: friends and family first, and then friends of friends, and then people that know you from circles, and then it's complete strangers. You kind of see how your business grows that way. But what's interesting is if you do it that way, at some point you do have to segment things to say exactly what Pat was saying. They still get the same quality of service, but a different quantity or different types of things. And so even if you start out that way, just know that at some point you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to really make that clear within your business so that your processes are clear for all clients across segments. But then if you start out kind of more the ideal, I have a niche, you've got this really clear client, you might grow slower, but you know that all the people coming in are exactly what you want. So that was something we noticed. And just because you don't do it in the beginning, just know that at some point you will, if your business is growing, you're going to have to figure that piece out.
Great. Well, that's great advice. So this one's a little bit vague, but I think we can work on something for them. So, what are the documents necessary for a proper succession plan to someone within the practice? So, I think maybe we can narrow this down to from a compliance standpoint potentially. How do we feel about that? Trying to okay. Michelle, what do you think about what documents do you get started with?
Yeah, so I it kind of all goes back to kind of what what you're looking for. So kind of like if this is a sale, so I don't know if this is like a sale or if it's just really a succession within. But just the biggest piece is documenting. So I think someone else had a question who was kind of saying, I have my own clients within an RIA and they're mine, and I don't have a non-compete and I don't have a non-solicit agreement, which is great, but do you have written down what should happen if something happens? So it's kind of the opposite of that. Like really, anytime you're documenting something, you're really just saying, in this case or in these cases, this is what we want to happen. So while you may not be connected, is it clear that if something were to happen in different scenarios, that you've actually written and is documented what should happen or what you both want to happen? So depending on the scenario, um, like buy sell agreements, it might be something like that. If it's an internal transition, you might need insurance to actually fund the buy sell, putting all of that actually into place. And you're really just trying to make sure that if someone has to buy your practice, whether it's through a catastrophic situation or it's actually over time, that if something happens to you in the process, that's what the insurance is for, is to pay out that purchase price to their loved ones who might be dependent on those assets. So that's really important to just not just have the documents, but actually funding if that were to happen. The transition plan, so actually having written out what is that transition going to look like. Not just here's the details of the sale or the purchase agreement, but the actual transition plan. Over what months or years do we want this to happen? And sometimes within those, you have clawback or retention clauses. If so many clients leave, it changes the purchase price. An employer agreement, if you're staying on, what is, you're an employee, what does that agreement look like? So those are kind of a handful of documents I can think of quickly.
Great. And let me just ask this: if where did you find that information? I guess so. If someone is like, "What documents do I need?" Like instead of just googling, is there a resource that you use to find that list, or how did you come to that?
Yeah, so I mean, some of that is just because we did that merger, so we merged
Yeah.
two businesses into ours. So I was really just thinking through what were the documents that we needed to have,
Mhm.
but also it's looking forward to if we were to do the internal transition, just those other documents. So that was kind of more because we've experienced that. So
Yeah.
that's where having like the attorney should be helping you draft the documents
Mhm.
that are needed. So if you don't Google a list, even reaching out, I know before any of this, we talked with an attorney just to see, what should we have in place? What do we need to be thinking about? So they should also be guiding you through that too.
And did you have an attorney that specialized in this, or how did you find your person?
Ours was more just kind of like a business attorney. So, not necessarily for financial advisory firms. I think, and I don't know if this is the same question, but there are firms, that do specialize just in this. So, whether it's like FP Transitions or like
Mhm.
Elevate Advisors, Brooklyn works exactly in this. New Planner Recruiting with Caleb Brown. So, there's a few.
Yep.
But for us, yeah, we kind of knew what we wanted. We had a pretty clear idea. We already really kind of had the structure laid out. So we really just needed the attorney to draft the documents for us.
Perfect. Thank you. Pat, how about for you? What documents
Yeah,
did
no,
you
well, I agree that you really have to know how you want that business to proceed. And I'll talk later on about another situation I have that will be a template for a subsequent buy sell. But yeah, I would definitely not do it yourself and make stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
As much as
Yep.
you'd like to, you might write up something that's not legally enforceable. So you've really got to have an attorney advising you on true contract law. And this is always assuming, of course, you found the right person because I've seen a few of these go south rather quickly because the expectations weren't really agreed to in full by both parties. It was just sort of a, I hope it works out situation. Yeah, so having an attorney and legal documents and things that are contractual and enforceable, not that you ever want to think the worst can happen, but you need to protect yourself because you have expectations about how this is going to work out. and trust but verify.
Yeah.
And back up. Yeah, and again, be very clear about how you want that business run. I mean, and maybe there's a period of time where you don't change anything. You don't move to another custodian. You just, and that's really to avoid disruption for your clients as well. You don't want this process to mess up your relationship with the clients or the potential relationship they have with the buyer, because it could go badly, and then all of a sudden you're not going to get value out of your business because all your clients fail.
Right.
So, yeah, got to be careful in that area too, to not make it painful for them.
Mhm. Another one is even like just I guess an obvious one is like a business valuation.
Mm,
Even if you're merging, even if it's internal, exactly what Pat's saying. I think the reason that succession plan, people are maybe kind of weary of it or they don't want to do it is it kind of has this negative connotation because there are legal documents, there are decisions and things and details you need to talk about and think about. And it's not a negative thing where I don't want to think that that will happen, but you're really just like we tell our clients to get estate planning or life insurance, it's
Mhm.
the exact same thing we're doing in our businesses for our clients and for our loved ones. So you're really just putting this information, you're really writing it down. So instead of thinking about it negatively, it's more just saying, this is what I tell my clients to do. I should really be practicing that. So
So, what is a proper evaluation method? So, this person specifically asked for a sale price, but it sounds like you went through that as you were merging, Michelle. So, I guess, how do you go about that?
yeah. So for us, we did get a valuation of our firm, and then we just applied that multiple to the other two firms because they were smaller that were coming in. So we just kind of to save costs and time, we use that same valuation, which was basically two times revenue for pretty much because you have different types of revenue. So this is someone asked like a valuation question. It depends on what your revenue is, so what the streams are. So those will each get broken out differently. If you have investment management, maybe that's AUM. That maybe a common one is around 2%, and these can all change. So I'm really just giving you kind of guidelines, and then what ours was, tax. If you do tax prep or bookkeeping, that might be like a one-time multiple. So it's a little bit different. So that's why it's really important to have someone do evaluation because they will separate out all of those pieces, but also the value of the people in the business and their experience and designations and pieces like that. So there's just a lot that goes into it where I think, especially if you're doing an internal transition, you want as a buyer or as a seller, you want to feel good about what you're getting or what you're selling. And so it's really important to kind of go through some of these details, even if they seem kind of technical or structured and that's not really your personality. It's really just protecting everyone. And in the end, that will help you all to feel really good about that. So that's where, those different metrics are what I would say, depending on the structure you have.
And did your lawyer do that valuation for you, or is it another third party, or who did that?
Yeah, no, we used FP transitions.
Okay,
They're a pretty common one. So that is who we used.
perfect. And
Mhm.
then Pat, how about for you? What's the proper evaluation method
Yeah,
that you're
well,
thinking
it's
about
been
for your
all
sale?
over the map. And what's kind of interesting is I think in the past couple of years, there's been this total frenzy of acquisitions going on. Now, my firm is not necessarily a target for firms like that. They want, mega assets under management. But I mean, I'm hearing two and a half, of revenues. Um, but be sure your revenues are good quality.
Mm,
You know, AUM, unfortunately, that's probably more highly valued than people who are on subscriptions versus people who come in and do one-time plans. But if you can prove that you've got a good pipeline, even of, it's even if it seems like a revolving door, but if you have steady revenue from doing financial plans, and I think that will become more common as we go through this transition in who we serve. And I think serving, the other 99% is going to be seen as having more value rather than a lot of people chasing the top 1%. So I suspect maybe valuation models will change over time and will value that kind of revenue maybe a bit more.
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So this ties into what we were just talking about. So are there any succession companies you would recommend working with to assist in the process? So Michelle, you said FP transitions. Pat, sounds like
Mhm.
you've worked with a business coach. Any other ideas of where folks can go?
Elevate advisor, so Brooklyn Brock, that's exactly the stuff that she wants to do. And then Caleb Brown with new planner recruiting. He's got some stuff on that too. So those are a few that I would list. Your custodian, they're actually another resource too. So
Yeah, I last year or 2 years ago, I switched to Shareholder Services Group, and they're a really great firm to work with. But of course, the custodian is going to be more focused on investment management view, But I think those other folks, NFP transitions, will have a more holistic approach to your entire book of business. Yeah, and working with a business coach helps you to get that sellable practice going. It's money well worth spending because they will kick your butt and cheerlead you at the same time and really tell you, and especially coach who's maybe taken other people through the same process so they know where the pitfalls are and they know what's important to get set up so you get a good multiple on your firm.
Great, super helpful. Any insights about internal succession planning would be much appreciated, specifically structures and policies around slowly selling equity to employees and accounting for possible changes of heart or plans down the road. Michelle, what do you think about that?
yeah, I just say put all of the scenarios into your documents or into a document. So if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, document, write out, really have those conversations. What would both parties want to happen? Again, it all starts with what the seller wants. But I think just talking about all of those, you never know what's going to happen. So documenting that is the biggest piece. I guess that would be the most important one that I would say.
Great. Pat, what do you think?
Since I'm a solo, I don't really have a lot of insights into
Yeah.
that. But I'll talk later on about another process that I go through that might be helpful in that, in terms of contingencies and what ifs.
Yep. That sounds good. So, how does firm valuation or sales price differ for an internal sale success plan versus external sale to a third party? So, I guess Michelle, do you want to weigh in on that for us?
Yeah, I can start with that one. This kind of ties back with the last one. When you're doing an internal succession plan, I think this is where you can have more flexibility. So it's again back to what both parties want. For example, is it going to be seller financed or is it going to be outside financing? Those are things that affect the end value or the end purchase price, pieces like that. So that's just one big thing that you have the option of doing. I think potentially discounting, so in kind of this valuation, if it's internal, one thing, as a seller, is that I was always thinking as a buyer when I was going to be, when I hope to buy a practice, I was thinking, I don't want to have to buy myself, so what is the value of the people that are already in your business, and you have to be careful that they're not buying themselves. And so I think this is where these conversations, saying what, back to that valuation, but also just between the two of you saying, well, what is my value, what is your value, and the roles and pieces like that, I think is really important. So that's one of the biggest things I would say, kind of like being on the side of wanting to be a buyer. That was something that I was always thoughtful of. So
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Pat, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I agree that an external sale, often you have far less control over what goes on. You're often not encouraged to hang around, and if you're like me, you do want to hang around, um, and your clients might not have the experience that they want. So to me, an internal sale or a private sale that, you work with someone over a period of time allows you to make, I think, a more successful transition, unless you're a firm that's already very turnkey and you just, I mean, big like Mather Group and I love all these people. I'm not kidding, and Buckingham and folks like that. That's a really great sort of easy way to get it done, but it's pretty much their way or the highway. So, if you already have, a fairly vanilla situation, it might not be as rough on the clients. But if you have a fairly unique practice and you want to preserve that uniqueness, then either looking for something private, and there's a lot more work on your part involved with that. If you go with the external sale to a big buyer, not it's not fun, but there's a lot more work involved if you are specifically going to look for your successor.
Got it.
mhm.
And in
Yeah,
my opinion, that's the way I want to go. But there's other people who would be very happy to go with a big company.
Mhm.
and, have it be very turnkey.
Mhm. Yeah. I think too,
Accept
this
the
kind of
value.
goes, oh, sorry, go ahead, Pat.
I was going to say, and accept the valuation that they're going to impose on your firm.
Mhm.
They're going to be
Hmm.
a bit,
Yeah.
they're going to be a bit more formulaic about how they value your firm.
Yeah. This kind of goes back to the one question someone had about like the structures and slowly selling equity to employees. In our firm where there's four partners and we're each 25% owners, there's so many things as we were going through the process, do we keep 1% more or not? And, when we were merging, we just believed that it was so important from the beginning that we were equal, because over time, even that 1% difference can fester and you can feel like you don't own as much. And so this is where like that's flexibility. So while you can decide what you want, those are the pieces you really have to think through, and who you're working with and who am I selling this to. Those are the kind of decisions you're going to have to make. But you can also structure it to where, so now when we have the 25% owners, I kind of call this like we have a succession plan for now. But as we get older, we're thinking, well, what is our succession plan? And so whether that's hiring and training and developing, kind of different levels of advisors who they're able to actually look forward and say, okay, I have a path to ownership and this is what that looks like, whether it's phantom stock or equity or whatever that is, or if it's actual equity. There's just pieces like that or structures that you can set up. But again, this goes back to what type of a firm am I building? Do I want a really large team to be able to facilitate that type of a structure into ownership for that many people? Or do I want to keep it small? Do I want to just stay myself into where it's going to be more of a one-time, transition? But the nice thing too is over time is you as the seller, you've got gain in your business, hopefully that you're selling. And so if you're structuring that over time, there's financial planning that you're doing as the seller instead of, one big transaction price. So there's just different pieces you need to be thoughtful of, because it affects both the buyer and the seller differently. The buyer, do I need cash right away to pay, 100% of this price, or do I need to get outside financing? Versus if the seller's willing to self finance it and say, you know what, you can pay me over a series of 5 years, and you write, you have the attorney write the notes yourself, and so then they're just paying you back. That allows for now maybe the profit of the business to actually, be split to where this person buying in, the successor, actually is taking some of the profit out of the business, but they can use that to pay you back. Like that's their choice. But it gives them choice. It gives you choice as a seller. And so this is where you can get really creative. You can make it what you want. I think that's really the cool thing is so many times too, maybe this is a negative kind of thought about succession planning is we think it has to be this way. But I think once you really get into it, you can get creative with it and say, well, I like this, but I don't like that. Well, what can you do to make it? When we first thought about merging, the first question that we asked Rob and Trevor, we said, what is the one thing or what are the things that are non-negotiables that if we start saying, well, this or this, you're going to be like, I'm out of here. That was the first thing we talked about
Mm.
because we wanted to know right away, what is it that you're like, nope, that's a no-go for me. And so once we got those out, it was things like, I don't want someone to tell me what to do. I want to, get my own work done. I don't want to have to come to the office every day. And we're like, that's it. And you might be surprised that it's actually not that long of a list or that structured of a list. It may just be things that, they like you, if they're wanting to buy a practice, they might want flexibility and they might want the ability to make it a firm that they care about just like you do and to personalize it, eventually. I just think those are some really great starting conversations. Like, what are the things that make this not work at all? If you start there, you save a lot of time too in future conversations. But that was really helpful, like a really great place for us to start.
I think that's good, like, relationship advice too.
Mhm. Yeah,
If
yeah,
you're thinking about dating someone, follow Michelle's advice for
there
succession
you
planning.
go. It,
I'm curious about this from like the next generation point of view. So if I'm a new advisor and I'm coming to Pat, and that's clear what she wants, right, in this situation. But you talked about this, Michelle, with the first firm that you were in, that you were hoping that that was going to be the situation, that advisor would want you to be their succession plan, and you weren't. So what is your recommendation for someone then if they're going to join a firm? Do they have this conversation up front? Do they not join it if that's not an option? I guess like it seems like a lot to ask if you're like trying to get hired, but maybe that's really important. I don't know. What do you think about that, Michelle?
Well, it's definitely, I think you can definitely see as you're coming in, you can see the structure of the firm already. If there's a solo firm and that person has been by themselves for years, you can see they love what they do. It's working for them. They don't need to go and don't desire to have this huge team to take care of the clients they want to take care of. So really it is important to kind of get for you, even I guess as you're kind of being employed by someone and getting hired, is where do I want to work? What's the kind of environment? Do I want to be on a team? Or, some people, I would say, like when I came out of college, I didn't know that I wanted to buy a firm, but I knew the type of firm I wanted to work at. And so that's where I started. And then as you work for a few years, you get some experience, you see what you like, what you don't like. And I think once you get to the point where you're starting to see, do I like this enough to purchase a firm or to go out on my own, or that I want to be a leader in this firm? I think those are the times that you need to start asking. You need to start saying, what are some leadership opportunities that are available to me here today so I can start to get experience doing that? Because you want to get experience doing that before you launch your own firm. If that's going to be a huge mistake, you need to find out if that's something that you can really do, because once you start your own business, there's a lot more to it than just giving clients advice. And so that's kind of the stuff where, yes, as you're getting hired, as you're looking for where you want to work, and as you start to get experience, say, here's what I think I like. How does this fit in here? And is there a path, or what does this look like if I want to be in this place? Those are great conversations. And don't be surprised if maybe it isn't, what you're hoping for. You might need to start looking around and feeling that out. But yeah, I think it's great to think about early on.
Perfect. So helpful. And then, Pat, I guess from your perspective, now that you're in the process of looking for someone to get in this partnership with, like how could someone appeal to you? I guess if someone cold called you out of the blue and said, I'm interested in this, like what are you going to be
Yeah,
looking for?
I will talk to anybody because I understand that you can meet people in the most unexpected situations. I was at the NAPFA, I guess it was the fall, yeah, in Denver. And I met someone that, although she was headed in another direction, I would have asked her on the spot because it just hit me immediately that she had the right personality and attitude towards clients that I was looking for. So it's not even really the specifics of exactly how I run my business. It's like, are my clients going to love this person? And I've done a lot of the Julia, oh, what's her name? Anyway, the
Melissa?
Julie, yeah, I've had my clients take her survey several times and they all really like me. So,
Mm.
we don't always know that day to day. So I'm really looking for someone who's going to have a great relationship with clients, and the technical aspects of how would come later. But yeah, it's really attitude first. I sort of assume a certain level of technical skill, and
Yeah.
hopefully my practice is structured in such a way that you can figure out the logistics pretty quickly because I basically have Pat's practice for dummies set up, through, like I'm a huge proponent of workflow management tools and all of that. So the nuts and bolts are not as important as who this person's going to be and how enthusiastic they will be about my clients. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So on that, then, what margin percentage is needed to entice the next generation owners to buy in? I guess what metrics do you think buyers are looking for, Pat? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Solo, I salary myself out entirely. So I don't really have a profit margin to talk about. But, I think, yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question for me to answer because I don't leave money in the business. I mean, I do, but I don't. But, for various reasons, I pay it all out. I would look, though, at what I'm spending on my tech stack and what I'm spending on support, and take my salary out of the equation and then look at, I don't know, I think sole advisors can run at a really healthy margin, which is a little bit different than firms with, and somehow the overhead starts to make that earnings picture a little sticky. So I think maybe Michelle would be a better answer than I.
Yeah, it really does depend what you're so in Pat's position, yeah, where she's saying, I'm the solo, I'm basically gonna pay myself out. If I think I did read something, there was an article someone had written on like taking kind of the benchmarking data from custodians like Schwab and Fidelity last year. They kind of wrote what were the profit margins that we should be looking for. And if you're kind of in Pat's position where you're saying, I'm really trying to optimize my current income, it's just me, so I'm taking everything out, then for that, more like a 30% margin, profit margin, is going to be fine, because it's profitable. So again, even if it's not for sale, it's saleable. So is there an asset that someone can take and they know they're going to make money on day one? But if this is something you say, wait, I actually want this to be sold. I don't just want to take all the money out. I want more of a value here when I sell it. There's an asset for me down the road. Then that profit margin was more like 40%, so higher. And that's really just where you're kind of saying, okay, we need profit because the sale of the business, yes, the revenue matters, but also that profit that they're going to keep is going to be really key because like we're saying, if you have, let's say you get acquired by some of these large firms, it's really their way, or the highway, and not in a bad way. It's just they have a process, and so they're really looking at, is your firm desirable for us to make our business even better? So their business, they want profit too. So that one you want a little bit higher of a profit margin. Some things I think are really important in those are clean and updated financials, that you're tracking your metrics. So these are kind of, if you're thinking you're going to sell it, these are things that I think, not just necessarily where you're saying I want current income only, but you're thinking someday I'm going to sell it, that you're tracking some type of metrics, that you have a solid team or process. So if it's a solo, that person can come in, these are the workflows, I'm going to show you how to do it, and you're going to just take over. And then consistent record of organic growth. So again, this is, I want a large sale value. And then Pat has alluded to this, a nice mix of client ages. So again, if you have a book of all retirees, at some point that is less desirable than having that mix of, do I have contact with the next generation of those clients? So you need to be considering some of those too. But that was kind of a helpful list of some of these things and kind of the percentages to think about.
Yeah, I think about the amount of my salary that I pay myself, and if I back that out to show what the profit is, I have a pretty darn good margin. So,
Mhm.
it's attractive. Yeah. You made me think about that. It's like, oh yeah, you know.
And
Exactly.
Michelle, you
You
said,
don't.
oh,
Mm,
sorry,
As I
go
say,
ahead.
exactly, Pat. You don't think about, like, oh, I'm paying myself out. But if you take out and you're like, well, what's a reasonable, like, if I were to replace myself, yeah,
yeah,
it is a nice profit. So yeah, exactly.
totally.
And
It's
Michelle,
good.
you said financials. I'm assuming everyone knows what you mean when you say that, but are you talking about, business tax returns, balance sheet,
Mhm.
like current profit and loss? Like, what does that look like, the packet?
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking more profit and loss. So that one's kind of tied to the profitability. There are some specific things I was thinking about, like kind of if you're talking about metrics, like what your growth rate is, profitability. So not just good enough to have high revenue, but that you're profitable. Key ratios, so like your revenue and your assets per client, households per professional. So if you're a team or if it's just one, kind of identifying some of those metrics, your model, and then just repeatable systems and processes. So I think those are some of the key things to think of when you're saying, what is my profit margin, and am I profitable? Is this margin good because I also have all of these things taken care of? Maybe you don't actually have the technology that you need, so you really have poor processes, but your profit margin's great because you're not actually paying for the things that you should have to have a desirable business. So I think this is where it's kind of the whole picture needs to be working together. So yeah, those are kind of a few other things I'd say.
Great. This one's also a good one for you, Michelle, to start on. So, strategy for moving from one owner to multiple owners, how to get everyone on the same page. So, then you talked
Mhm.
about having like the transparent conversations. What else would you recommend?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, is really just defining your roles. What is each person going to be responsible for? So back when we merged our firms, we each had a position. We knew what we were going to be, responsible for as far as the financial planning process of clients. Who's responsible for placing trades? Who's going to do paperwork? Who's going to do tax returns? Pieces like that. Who's going to do the prospecting and the business development? Who's going to do what? And having that pretty well defined, but also written down. So I think these are the things that if you're going to be transitioning, And so you've kind of got this the seller and the buyer. A seller, has to realize that at some point the decision making authority will change, and hopefully that happens over time. And there's a really solid comfort level with that, but it can happen over time. So it doesn't have to be all at once. But I think sometimes those are hard things to give up. So I would think the same thing now, having a firm that if we sold it, I wouldn't just want to hand it over because there's so much hard work in building that. And there's so much that you're thinking of. So it really has to be this balance of, who should be doing what, who should be making decisions. So maybe it's for the first year or two or three, the existing owner should be making these decisions, maybe like the practice management role. And then, after that, if it, switches to where, but over time you're sharing financials maybe the whole time. So they see how this works, they know the profit, things like that. So I think that's something is when the timing of that happens. That's kind of, I think, I would think that would be a hard one, Pat. You could probably say, yeah, like making decisions and actually having authority to do something in the business might be really hard to let go of. And then I think the vision just going forward needs to be really clear. So if you're on a team that you're saying, and this is something that even this year we're getting, even clearer on. So when we merged, we said, this is, what we want to grow and we want to have, a large business, but now we're getting more clear on what does that actually look like? By when do we want to do that? And so then you can actually go back and look at that together and say, are we on track? Did we do those things? If not, what do we need to change? And so having those things kind of decided, kind of that vision up front, you can actually go back and say, wait, this is what we said we wanted and we're doing it. What's changed and what do we need to change? And it's okay if that happens. It's just getting back on track. And especially if you have a lot of people that you all need to be bought in, because if you don't all believe that this is something that you're wanting to do or that you think is worthy of your time, you should not be owning a business. Like if this is not something that you feel is worth it and that you're taking care of people. But if it is, then that's great. You can stay, but you really need to get clear of this is what I want and then we reset that vision. So I think for a team, those are some really important things.
Yeah, and with my succession plan, there will be a team in place for a while. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that will be an opportunity to actually make the business grow. That if you have two people, there's a sort of a logic to doubling the practice. And then, there's a lot of questions to ask about, how you handle that as well. Do you want them to take over the business as it is and then just replace, because the one thing you can't argue with older clients is if they pass away on you, then that's another reason, as harsh as it may sound, that you want to have good demographics because you're going to age out your clients. But so I mean, you're kind of raising an interesting issue that I have to switch from I'm the boss of everything to maybe someone else has some say, and I have to be careful to say, well, wait, you're only in the first year, you're only a 10% owner right now, so you do not yet rule. But when it gets to be 50-50, I mean, I'm just thinking maybe the authority transfers along with the degree of ownership.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And do you think like the successor owner that they should see all financials like P&L, not really balance sheet, but P&L, there's really just nothing on the balance sheet. Maybe there is, but like P&L, do you feel like that would be important for the buyer to see?
Yeah, I don't think you can do it without, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, you need to show not only, your profit margin, but where you're spending your money. Like I said, I don't have staff. I have a tech stack that acts in lieu of a staff. It is a bit less expensive.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, yeah,
and
no,
it
that
lot
doesn't
less
is,
it
expensive.
doesn't need to go on vacation. So,
yeah.
but that's all good because I believe in vacations. So for me, it is going to be going, first of all, from a solo to a team and then to, quietly going away.
Yep.
Not really going away. I hate thinking about that. That's why I'm so, interested in the sell and state thing and having it be a fairly long process.
Hmm.
So,
And I think that's why I think, as I watched over the 12 years I was at the firm I was at, I think that's just the thing. Like, you put so much work into building the business that you have, into caring for the clients that you have who may have been there that entire time.
mm,
And so to think about letting go of, relationships where they're going to reach out to you when they need something, or, people you enjoy talking to, I think it's such a big transition. I wouldn't. I wouldn't enjoy that transition either, or maybe the thought of it. But I think that's where it's really thinking through, okay, so how can I do this slowly so that you now have like your life balance, whereas we kind of tell clients, maybe slowly transition into retirement or take a vacation to see if that's what you want to do. You're really doing the same thing. And so I think that's, it's great when you can do that over time. But I think for buyers to realize that it is very hard for, sellers to let go. But I also think for sellers, one of the things that, both of you have to be on the same page and be understanding of each other, because buyers, if someone's coming in and they're saying, I want to take care of your clients and I want to put in the time, that they are serious about that. And so it's realizing kind of what they're giving up. They could go work anywhere. They want to do this with you. I think if you can sense that attitude, that just helps both of you. But it does really help for both of you to understand what each other is giving up, but also what you're gaining. Each of you is gaining something that you want to.
Right. Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, you don't let the person in the door gradually. I mean, they need to be the financial commitment to purchase the practice should be somewhat separated from their degree of involvement, I think.
Mhm.
Otherwise, they're going to be sorry they did that because they're not really getting to do anything. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's a
Yeah.
consideration for a long-term sell and stay.
I want to make sure we get this question. I know Pat, you wanted to talk about it. The best way to
Oh,
plan for my death or disability in regards to my practice.
right. That to me was more urgent than having a succession plan because we can have something bad happen to us at any. And if we've all been on the planet long enough, each of us has had maybe a scare or two already. So what I have done for that, which is independent of succession planning, but can be an emergency succession plan if needed, is what we are calling a practice guardianship. This is another advisor who's geographically close to me because access to our stuff is important and has similar software, similar approach. And what we've done is we've worked out an agreement. We figured out if either of us were killed, God forbid, or disabled to the point where we couldn't work with our clients for a while, what are the things that would be the pain points for our clients? What do we have to make sure we have in place so they're not adversely affected? And we did have an advisor here in the Bay Area who was in a horrible car accident, put in a medically induced coma. Her husband did not have keys to her office.
Mhm.
So they had to go through all kinds of stuff just to get at her client stuff. So we have a succession agreement that basically says if either of us is disabled and for how long, here are the things that have to absolutely be done. Here are the things we agree to do for a while, but then after a certain amount of time, we need to be compensated for it. You can't do it for free because you're trying to run two practices at the same time. And then there's also, if the disability is permanent or if there's death, that my practice guardian does actually have the right of first refusal to purchase my practice at a reasonable multiple. And if I'm disabled, it's going to be one thing. If I'm not, then it's sort of going to be whatever, because I'm gone and there's no one waiting to inherit that money. But I think just for peace of mind in terms of disability, and it's really contingency planning and not succession planning, but it is a form of emergency succession planning if something really bad happens really suddenly and you don't have anything in place right away. We could not find a lawyer who would be willing to look at our agreement and make it enforceable. So it's a contract of honor, but we have signed off on it. And the most important thing is for each of us to have a person who knows what's going on with us, is aware, and also knows that there's someone they need to contact. And there's sort of like what we call a red file process. The red file gets opened. There's the password, and the
Mhm.
combination to the lock on the door so you can get into my apartment and all of that sort of stuff. So it's sort of like a emergency drill procedure. But yeah, I think that even if you don't have a succession plan yet, you need to have some way to protect your clients.
Yeah.
Um, and it has to be someone who knows what they're doing when they do take it over. So
Mhm.
Anything you want to add to that real quick, Michelle?
Yeah, I think that's so great. That's my preferred, is that there is another advisor that you've selected, whether it's similar values, service style, custodian, whatever it is, in your area that you can. Because if you think about someone like your spouse or something like that, they may or may not know what they need to know. And so having another advisor who is going to know what to do. Plus, it just takes that burden off of them. So I think that's huge. And then one thing you highlighted is so we actually have done for a while, we do valuations every year or every couple of years so that we always have a current valuation so that if this happens, so if there is a situation where, we need to pay out, a partner's family or something, that we actually have like a recent valuation. So we can actually, in our documents, it says that we point back to the most recent valuation. So that's something, if you're, again, back to that person who has that team, you want to make sure that you're getting that valuation, I would say annually, so that they know what the value is, what it is in case something happens, that they're aware of what they actually own.
Mhm.
Perfect. My gosh, I feel like we covered so much today. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Pat. And thank you, everyone who joined us. We're going to put a link in the chat for you to schedule a call with our sales team if you do have just some general questions about launching a firm or even want to hear more about succession planning, and we can offer some additional resources. So, again, thank you both to our panelists, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.